And good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak briefly to you and also to bring this conference to a close. Before I say anything, let me remind you that safety is a core value at Brookhaven Lab, and you may have heard this before, but want to send you home in better shape than you came, raised up by the discussions that you heard this afternoon in the various conference rooms in here, and certainly not injured. It's important, and in fact, so be careful walking around out there and driving. Yesterday we had an accident on site, a car accident, so be especially careful driving around the place. Let me also thank the conference organizers for the work they've done in preparing this conference. As it was last year, this year's conference was a giant success. It's obvious just from the feeling in the room and from talking to various people. So on behalf of the lab, I'd like to thank all of you. In particular, Diane, Joe, Anna, and Ofe, who did an incredible amount of work, more I think than they knew about prior to this. And I'm sure they'll be looking forward to handing this conference off to the next group next time. I'd also like to thank others, the larger team who helped, SEGPA, staff services, a whole bunch of advisors, and everyone else, and especially to thank all of you for participating in the conference today. A conference like this, which brings the whole lab together, a whole bunch of different subjects discussed, a broad range of subjects, and really different people, is rare, but it's an important event. It gives us a chance to see just how exciting our laboratory really is and how broad the reach really is. It's exciting, it's amazing, and it's especially enjoyable by virtue of the fact that it was driven by younger researchers at Brookhaven. It's very uplifting to be a part of this, I have to tell you. I do a lot of tours around the lab, and this conference reminds me of going on tours with people who have never been to Brookhaven before, who are totally amazed by the end of the day at all they've seen, and basically can't contain their enthusiasm for wanting to come back, for wanting to do more, for wanting to somehow become a part of it. And that's what this meeting, I think, is like for me. So one of the first messages I wanted to give today was that postdocs and students, the whole younger generation at the lab, are the lifeblood of our lab. You all are the source of our energy and our drive, and you know this, but I'm admitting it. You're forward-looking. You all are actually able to change. You offer fresh and new viewpoints. You ask questions, and you solve problems. Let me also say something which I think you're aware of, and that is that you all have profoundly changed the place during the last 20, 30 years. When I first came to the lab in the 80s, and it was true even into the 90s, there were fewer than 50 postdocs. I've seen numbers as low as 20 and 25 at any given time. It was a completely different place. I have no doubt sometimes that when you talk about the lab, you talk about feeling a bit isolated. When there were only 20 of us around the place, it was really isolated. My name for Brookhaven was Mom, Dad, and Kidland back in those days, and I suspect it still feels like that now. And I have some of that stuff, a wife and some kids, but boy, it was different. There was a concerted effort on the part of BSA, Brookhaven Science Associates, starting in 1998, to change the game as far as the number of young people here. And now there are 160 postdocs altogether. It's a quarter of the scientific staff. It's really a remarkable change, and it shows completely. I think credit to BSA, they saw that the lab needed to grow. It needed to grow in new directions, it needed more staff, and it needed to have a completely different look and feel, which it does today. That completely changed the game. So let me just illustrate with one example. When I came back in '82, the lab was in a transition period. The accelerator, the high energy physics accelerator, Isabel, had just been canceled. Nick Samios and others, Tom Ludlam, were starting to think about Rick and what the hell we were going to do. The focus of the laboratory was then, and had been for years appropriately, on nuclear and particle physics. Given the history and the accomplishments, that was exactly the right place for it. But in the last 30 years, the BES programs have grown tremendously. They have grown many times over compared to what they were like back then. And as you know, NSLS2 now drives one of the main pillars, the energy pillar of the lab, that represents a wholly different kind of future for us. One that Esther was talking about, that's focused on solving some of the nation's hardest problems. Together with the other pillar, the nuclear and particle physics pillar, origin of matter and mass, involving the transition from RIC to ERIC, they represent a whole different future for us and our future. What I want to tell you is that the growth, in part, was driven by hiring. It was driven by hiring young people, some of whom stayed, all of whom asked hard questions. In fact, there are still some familiar, now older faces here that drove that change and made it all happen, and not just in BES, but actually across the lab. So another one of the messages I have for you is that students, postdocs, assistant scientists are an important part of the lab's fabric. I'm looking at the clock, don't want to bore you to tears, and it's not my fault. They asked me to tell you something about myself and what it was like for me here. So I will. I came in '82 as an assistant scientist, as Diane said. At the time, there was a new light source that was just being built, NSLS, and what seemed like at the time a completely open agenda, which it was. I'm embarrassed to say it now, I didn't have a clue what the lab's mission was, or whether there even was one. I'm not sure anybody knew whether there was a mission. There was. My agenda was to use synchrotron radiation to do great things. That's basically what they asked me to do. In materials, in energy, in condensed matter physics. It was incredibly exciting at that time. Every experiment with the synchrotron was new. Everything you tried was different. The synchrotron was a big, burly X-ray source, orders of magnitude more light than anything else that we'd ever used. And so everything you did was new. We built the beamlines, we built the end stations, and then did the experiments, hosting a bunch of outside users, we used to call them. A lot of those experiments worked, and some didn't. A lot didn't. My particular interest was in using X-rays to study magnetism and also studying surfaces, and we would do that in teams with often, well, always with collaborators, often with friends, university professors by then at other places, mostly young, but some old-timers, some old famous timers, working together for weeks at a time and then doing that for years, night and day. It was a different kind of a lifestyle than I eventually evolved to, a lot more like what I'm doing right now, actually, to be honest. But it was exciting, and my original aspiration in coming here, which I used to call the 5-year plan, the idea was to be here for 5 years, then figure out what I really wanted to do and get out of here. That changed. What happened to me was that I kept finding new opportunities. Every year there were new things to try or to do. That was true about the science we were doing, but eventually as I got older and became involved with more responsibility, there were different kinds of opportunities that involved increasing amounts of responsibility. In fact, I got to become a group leader, which until I had this job, I used to think was the best job at the lab. A group leader involves science leadership. You get to decide stuff, what to do. You get to work with young people. You work with the DOE, and you work with the lab management. And on top of all that, you get to do research. It really is an exciting job. Maybe it is the best job at the lab. It was a lot of fun. But I went on and did some other things, as I'll tell you in a minute. I'm almost done. I was also asked to give you some advice. Golly. So I think what I'm going to do is tell you about some advice I didn't take, that I was given but didn't take, and tell you why. One of the areas we're trying to improve here is in the mentoring, in the way in which we tell people how things work. It's been true for 20 years, 30 years that we had to improve that, and we have a more organized program now that we're going to roll out in the next couple of months. But at the time that I was thinking, or what was being considered for tenure, a year or two before that, I was still working on those two projects, one having to do with magnetism and the other having to do with surfaces. The one in magnetism was pretty high profile. We had gotten some pretty cool results and a lot of a lot of invitations to go to really exciting places, fun papers. But that was an experiment that involved working with some famous older timers. The surface experiment was with a bunch of friends, for the most part, university professors and their students. We had plenty of good results, but it wasn't the same high-profile collaborators. And the results didn't capture the same publicity that the magnetic scattering did. So, you know, that sounds like a pretty good situation, and I was happy with it. One of my mentors took me aside at one point and gave me some advice. It was to focus on the surface scattering and give up the magnetic scattering as far as a tenure case was concerned. And the reason, he said, was that it was all good, but he didn't want my accomplishments. He wanted my accomplishments to shine through in the tenure case that they would eventually make, and they were worried that all those famous folks were going to be a shadow to me. So here's some advice. It is very important that your accomplishments shine through in what you do. It's important that you and that we can identify the things that you do so we can talk about them, so we can give you credit for them. That's true. That's important. And we have to work with you to make sure we figure out how to do that. That's something that a mentor can help with. But there was no way I was going to stop doing magnetic scattering. Are you kidding? You know, after the investment that had been made, the time that we'd put in, the stuff we'd gotten done, there's no way I was going to do that. So I enormously appreciated his concern. He was trying to help me. I appreciated that. I was polite about it. I didn't tell him what I really thought. But I declined to take that advice, and I kept on working on both. And, you know, there were some bumps. There were some parts in what he said that were true. It's important to think about the good advice, the wise advice that experienced people give you. But here's another one of my messages, and it was echoed by Esther. Science is driven by passion. You do it because you can't do anything else, because you love it. And there was just no way that I was going to not do all that stuff. So that's advice I'm giving you, and I've also told you some advice I didn't take. But I will say this, I'm older now. It's important to heed good advice from wise people, to understand what they mean, to integrate it. It's especially true if other people are depending on you, for example, if you have kids. But I think it's important to follow your dreams, and that's what I'm saying. It's important to follow your dreams, certainly when you're young, but I think all the time. So I actually got tenure. Don't ask me how. Got to be a group leader, was the head of condensed matter physics, was an ALD for basic energy sciences. I've had every job there is between assistant scientist and lab director, was the deputy. So much for the 5-year plan. That didn't work out for me. I think I can tell you that the lab director's job is the best one I've had so far. It's really exciting. I did not expect that. There are some really serious challenges. There's some hard thinking. It's as hard as any research problem sometimes we ever did. But the excitement about this laboratory, the opportunities that we have, the things we can do, the impacts we can make in nuclear and particle physics, in energy science and technology, and a whole range of things, are for me totally compelling. And it's motivation enough. For me, that's what national labs really offer. They offer these incredible opportunities, and Brookhaven in particular. If you know the DOE mission from 3 secretaries ago, this is the best version of it, in my opinion. It's to discover the solutions that power and secure America's future. It's a wide open agenda. It involves taking on the hardest problems. There's huge risk. It stretches from energy to national security to basic and discovery science. The way we do it at Brookhaven, it involves building big machines that only we can build, and then attacking those problems in teams. All of that is unique. It's part of what we do that is completely different from other kinds of places, and it's what, for me, makes BNL such an exciting place to be. I also think this is an incredibly exciting time. Things are really happening. and I look forward with great interest for the next several years. So that's what I had to say, and thank you very much for listening to me. I got it in under 20, and good luck with your careers. Thank you very much.